What would you do if a bleeding stranger and a freezing child knocked on your door at 2 a.m.? Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional cinematic stories like this, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next, because this is one of those nights that changes everything. Chloe Jenkins had spent most of her life trying to make herself smaller in a world that constantly judged her for simply existing. At 28, she carried over 300 pounds of body weight. But the real weight she felt was not physical. It was the silent judgment in public spaces, the uncomfortable stares, and the quiet cruelty that followed her everywhere she went. Eventually, she chose isolation over humiliation. She moved far away from crowded streets to a weather-beaten cabin hidden deep in the wooded outskirts of Spokane, Washington. There, surrounded by towering pine trees and endless silence, she built a life that was lonely but controlled. She worked online as a bookkeeper, handling numbers instead of people. Numbers never judged her. People always did. In mid-November, the weather turned violent. Cold rain hammered the forest for days, turning roads into sheets of black ice. The news warned everyone to stay indoors, but Chloe was already where she always was. Alone, wrapped in a thick blanket, sitting in her oversized armchair with a cup of lukewarm tea resting against her stomach. The wind outside howled like something alive. The cabin creaked under its force, and in that deep silence between storms, she tried to ignore the feeling that winter always brought her, the feeling of being completely cut off from the world. Then came the sound. A heavy knock. Not wind, not branches. Something deliberate. Chloe froze instantly. Her heart began to race so hard it hurt. Living alone in a remote cabin meant every instinct screamed danger first, curiosity second. She stood slowly, her heavy footsteps pressing into the wooden floorboards as she moved toward the door. Each step felt louder than the storm outside. She reached the peephole and looked out. At first, she saw only darkness and rain. Then a shape emerged under the flickering porch light. A man, tall, soaked completely through. His hair clung to his forehead, and his shoulders rose and fell with exhaustion. But what froze Chloe wasn't just him. It was the child in his arms, a little girl, no older than 5, wrapped tightly in a large coat, shivering violently. The man lifted his fist and knocked again, harder this time. When his hand dropped, Chloe saw something that made her stomach tighten. Blood. A dark smear on the white door. In that moment, fear and empathy collided inside her. Every rational instinct told her to stay back, lock the door, call for help. But the child's trembling figure broke through everything. She unlocked the door. Cold air rushed in instantly. "Please." The man's voice was rough, broken, almost swallowed by pain. "Car, black ice. We crashed. I just need warmth for my daughter." He didn't wait for permission. His knees weakened as he leaned forward, struggling to stay upright. Chloe reacted on instinct, catching him by the arm and pulling him inside with surprising strength. For someone who had always been told she took up too much space, her body now became the only reason this man didn't collapse onto the floor. She guided him toward the rug near the fireplace. "Sit here," she said firmly, surprising even herself with her calm voice. The little girl clung to her father for a moment before stepping back. Her wide eyes scanned the room, fear still present, but confusion replacing panic. "Are you hurt?" Chloe asked softly. The girl shook her head. "Daddy's bleeding," she whispered. That was all Chloe needed to hear. She knelt beside the man. The firelight revealed the truth. This was not just a car accident. His side was soaked in blood, thick and dark, spreading through his clothing far too fast for comfort. "I need a first aid kit," she said immediately. When she returned, she worked quickly, cutting through his clothing. Her hands were steady, even though her mind wasn't. She expected disgust, maybe fear in his eyes when he saw her up close. But his gaze stayed sharp, observant, controlled, almost too controlled for a man bleeding out. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Hunting accident." Chloe looked at the wound. Circular, clean, too clean. She had never treated a gunshot wound before, but she had seen enough documentaries to recognize the truth. This was no accident. Still, she didn't press him. "Hold still," she said instead. This is going to hurt. As she worked, cleaning and packing the wound, the silence between them grew heavier. Outside, the storm continued, unaware of what had entered the cabin. "I'm Gabriel," he finally said through strained breath. Chloe tied the bandage tightly. "Well, Gabriel," she replied, "you're not dying on my floor tonight." For the first time, something almost like relief crossed his face. He looked at her properly then. Really looked. Not at her size, not at what the world usually saw, but at her hands, her focus, her calmness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you've done." Chloe didn't answer. She simply kept pressure on the wound, unaware that this single night had already started rewriting both of their lives. Outside, somewhere far down the icy road, engines began to move through the storm. Chloe didn't hear the engines at first. The storm still owned the night outside her cabin, drowning most sounds in wind and rain. Inside, everything felt contained, almost unreal, like the world had narrowed down to just 3 people and a dying fire. Gabriel lay on her rug, breathing unevenly, his face pale under the warm glow of the fireplace. The little girl stayed close to him, wrapped in a blanket Chloe had quickly found, her small hands gripping the fabric as if it was the only stable thing left in her world. Chloe moved carefully around them, gathering supplies, her mind still trying to process what had just happened. A stranger bleeding at her door, a child in shock, and a wound that didn't match the story she had been told. Still, she didn't ask again. Not yet. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant delaying questions. She returned with fresh bandages and antiseptic, kneeling beside Gabriel once more. The firelight softened the edges of everything, but not enough to hide the tension in his face. Even injured, he carried a presence that didn't belong in a remote cabin like hers. "Try not to move," she said quietly. "I've had worse," Gabriel muttered, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. Chloe almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was such a familiar lie people told when they were trying not to feel weak. She continued working, cleaning, pressing, wrapping. Her large hands were surprisingly gentle, steady in a way she never gave herself credit for. She always assumed people saw her as clumsy or excessive. But here, in this moment, her size was strength, control, stability. Gabriel noticed it. His eyes followed her movements with a quiet intensity, not invasive, just observant, like someone trying to understand something unfamiliar. "You're doing this alone out here?" he asked suddenly. Chloe didn't look up. "It's better that way." A pause. "That doesn't sound like a choice," he said. That line hit deeper than it should have. Chloe tightened the bandage slightly, focusing on the task instead of the emotion rising in her chest. "It is," she replied. "People make things complicated." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He shifted slightly, then winced, jaw tightening against the pain. The little girl immediately leaned closer to him, worried. "Daddy?" "I'm okay, Mia," he said softly, forcing reassurance into his voice. Mia. So that was her name. Chloe adjusted the blanket around the child. "Do you want some water, Mia?" The girl nodded. As Chloe stood to fetch it, Gabriel spoke again, quieter this time. "You didn't hesitate." Chloe paused. "I had a bleeding man on my porch. And a child. There wasn't much to think about." "That's exactly what I mean," he said. Something in his tone made her glance at him. He wasn't praising her in a simple way. It felt deeper, heavier, like he understood something about that decision that she didn't. But before she could ask, he changed the subject. "Your place is far from anything," he said. Chloe handed Mia the water carefully. That was the point. Gabriel watched her for a moment longer. Then, almost like he was testing reality, he added, "Most people wouldn't have opened the door." Chloe finally met his eyes. "Most people don't live out here alone." A faint silence followed. Outside, the wind shifted. A deeper sound moved through it, but neither of them fully registered it yet. Gabriel's breathing was still unstable, but he was regaining awareness. His eyes sharpened slightly as he looked around the cabin, taking in exits, corners, distance. Not casually, instinctively. Chloe noticed. Something about the way he scanned the room felt wrong, not unsafe in a simple way, but trained. "You military?" she asked carefully. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Something like that. It wasn't an answer. It was avoidance. Before Chloe could press further, Mia climbed slightly closer to her father, pressing her head against his shoulder. Gabriel immediately softened, one hand resting protectively on her back. That small gesture told Chloe more than anything he had said so far. Whatever he was hiding, he wasn't dangerous to his daughter. That much felt real. Chloe stood again, walking toward the kitchen to boil water for tea. The routine helped her think. It gave her space to breathe. Behind her, Gabriel's voice followed quietly. "You live like this. No one around. No support. Aren't you ever afraid?" Chloe paused at the counter. For a moment, she considered lying, saying no, saying she was fine. But honesty slipped out instead. "Every day," she said, "you just learn to function anyway." That answer lingered in the air longer than expected. Gabriel didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was lower. "That's not living," he said. Chloe turned slightly, kettle in hand. "It's surviving." A silence settled between them, heavier now, more personal. Outside, the storm began to shift again. The wind changed direction, and somewhere in that distance, headlights cut faintly through the snow. Chloe didn't notice, but Gabriel did. His expression changed subtly. The calm, injured father faded for a second, replaced by something colder, sharper, a man who recognized movement where others saw weather. His hand tightened slightly against the couch. "Mia," he said gently, "stay close." The little girl nodded immediately. Chloe returned with hot water, unaware of the shift in energy inside the cabin. She placed the cup near Gabriel, her movement steady but slower now, like something in the air had subtly changed. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his face. "Nothing," Gabriel said too quickly. But outside, the distant sound of tires on ice grew slightly clearer, closer. And for the first time that night, Chloe felt it too. The sound outside didn't fully register at first. It blended with the storm like everything else in the frozen night. But something about it didn't belong to nature. It was too steady, too controlled. Wheels on ice, movement with intention. Chloe stood near the kitchen counter, the hot water still steaming beside her. But her attention had shifted without her fully realizing it. There was a subtle tension in the air now, like the cabin itself had started holding its breath. Gabriel felt it first. His posture changed almost imperceptibly. The injured man on the floor was still there, but underneath him, something else surfaced. Awareness, calculation, the kind of focus that didn't come from fear, but from recognition. Mia, sensing nothing clearly but reacting to emotion, moved closer to her father again. "Daddy," she whispered. "It's okay," Gabriel said softly, but his eyes never left the direction of the window. Chloe finally noticed. "What is it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Gabriel hesitated just long enough to confirm her concern. "Stay away from the windows." That wasn't an explanation, it was a command disguised as calm. Chloe's heart tightened slightly, but she didn't panic. Not yet. She had lived too long alone in silence to jump at every uncertain sound. Still, something about his tone made her obey without arguing. She stepped back from the counter. Outside, the headlights became clearer. Not one vehicle, multiple, moving slowly through the snow-covered road leading up to her cabin. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel. Close, too close. Chloe's mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe lost travelers, maybe help, maybe coincidence. But nothing about the timing felt random. Not after a bleeding man and a frightened child had appeared at her door. Gabriel pushed himself slightly upright, ignoring the pain that shot through his side. His jaw tightened as he listened. "They found us faster than I expected," he murmured. Chloe turned sharply. "Found you?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence said everything. Mia clutched the blanket tighter. Chloe felt a cold drop settle in her stomach. "Gabriel, who are you?" Before he could respond, a heavy knock echoed outside. Not like before, not desperate. This one was controlled, measuring. Chloe instinctively moved closer to the hallway, her body between the sound and the child without even thinking about it. Something deep inside her shifted into protection mode. Gabriel noticed that too. Another knock, then a voice from outside, muffled by the storm but firm enough to carry through the wood. "Open the door!" Chloe froze. Gabriel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, exhaling slowly as if preparing for something unavoidable. Then he said it. "They're not police." Chloe turned back toward him, confusion and fear mixing now. "Then who are they?" Gabriel's eyes opened, cold, focused, controlled despite the pain. "People I used to trust," he said. That answer changed everything. Outside, engines idled, multiple doors opened, footsteps in snow. Organized, not random, not frightened, professional. Chloe stepped back instinctively. "I don't understand," she whispered. Gabriel forced himself to sit upright fully now, one hand pressing against his wound. "Listen to me carefully." His voice had changed. The injured father was still there, but buried beneath something far more dominant. "If they come inside, stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you, and protect Mia." Chloe's eyes widened slightly. "Protect her? I don't even know what's happening." Gabriel looked at her directly now, not as a victim, not as a stranger, but as someone assessing whether she could survive what was coming. "You're about to find out," he said quietly. A third knock came, harder. Then the sound of something metallic scraping against the doorframe, testing it. Chloe stepped backward again, her breathing tightening. Mia pressed her face into Chloe's blanket instinctively, sensing danger even without understanding it. And then everything happened fast. The front door shook violently, as if struck by force. Wood creaked, hinges strained. The storm outside suddenly felt secondary compared to the pressure building at her entrance. Chloe's mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything other than stand still. But Gabriel moved first. He struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood that immediately soaked through his bandages again. His movement was slow, but determined. "Stay back," he told Chloe. Another impact hit the door, this time stronger. The lock groaned. Chloe's breath caught. "Gabriel, stay. Back." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, and she listened. The door exploded inward, not slowly, not carefully. It was forced open with brutal efficiency. Cold air rushed into the cabin like a living thing. Snowflakes swirled through the doorway, and silhouettes filled the entrance. 3 men, dark clothing. No uniforms, no hesitation. Their presence didn't belong to rescue, it belonged to violence. The lead man stepped forward slightly, scanning the room. "Where is he?" he asked calmly. Gabriel stood between them and Chloe now, and in that moment everything in him changed completely. The injured father disappeared. What remained was something colder, sharper, dangerous in a way that didn't need movement to be understood. "I'm right here," Gabriel said. The men froze slightly, recognizing his voice. Chloe stood behind him, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a retrieval, or an execution. And she realized too late that the man she had saved wasn't just a victim of the storm. He was the storm they had come looking for. For a moment, everything inside the cabin held completely still. The storm outside kept moving, wind pressing against the wooden walls, snow scraping across the windows, but inside, time felt suspended. 3 armed men stood in the doorway. Gabriel stood between them and Chloe, bleeding, exhausted, but no longer resembling the injured stranger she had taken in hours ago. Something had changed in him, not slowly, not subtly. It was immediate, like a switch had been flipped. The man who had arrived soaked in rain and carrying a child was still there somewhere, but buried so deep that Chloe could barely recognize him now. The lead intruder stepped forward slightly, boots crunching on the wooden floor. "Boss," he said carefully, almost respectfully, "you shouldn't have left the convoy." That single word hit Chloe harder than anything else so far. Boss. Her mind struggled to connect it with the man she had been treating on her rug, the man she had bandaged and spoken gently to, the man Mia called Daddy. Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He glanced briefly at Chloe, not to warn her, to check her. like he was measuring whether she would break under what came next. Then his eyes returned to the men. "You tracked me here," Gabriel said quietly. The man at the door lowered his head slightly. "We followed protocol. Your signal was weak, but still active. Signal tracked protocol." Chloe's stomach sank. Protocol. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't coincidence. This was a system, a network, something far bigger than anything she had ever been close to. Mia pressed closer to Chloe, sensing danger again, her small hands trembling. Chloe instinctively placed her arm around the child. Gabriel noticed that too. Something flickered in his eyes, brief, almost human. Then it disappeared again. One of the men shifted his stance, glancing at Chloe. "We weren't informed there would be witnesses." Chloe froze. Witnesses, not guests, not civilians, witnesses. Gabriel's voice dropped lower. "She's not part of this." The man tilted his head slightly. "Anyone in this room becomes part of it." The words were calm, not aggressive. That made them worse. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Her entire life had been about avoiding attention, avoiding confrontation, disappearing into the background. And yet here she was, standing in the center of something she never asked to see. Gabriel stepped forward slightly. "You don't touch her," he said. The temperature in the room changed, not physically but emotionally. The lead man studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly. "Understood," he said, "but we need you back. There are matters unfinished." Gabriel exhaled through his nose, almost tired. "I'm aware." A pause. Then one of the men looked at his wound. "You're compromised," he said. Gabriel didn't deny it. Instead, he said something that made Chloe's blood run colder than the storm outside ever could. "So fix it." The men moved instantly, not violently yet, but efficiently, like trained professionals entering a controlled environment. One of them stepped forward and closed the door behind them, blocking the wind. Another checked the perimeter through the windows. They weren't intruders anymore. They were reclaiming control of the space. Chloe instinctively stepped back with Mia toward the kitchen counter. Her mind was trying to process too many impossible things at once. Gabriel walked slowly toward the center of the room, each step controlled despite the pain. One of the men opened a case near the door. Inside were medical supplies far more advanced than anything Chloe had. She realized then that Gabriel's earlier injury, his arrival at her door, everything about that night, had not been random at all. It had been an interruption, a disruption. Something had gone wrong in a world she didn't belong to. The man who had called him boss began treating his wound quickly, professional and precise. Gabriel didn't flinch. He only spoke once. "Status." The man responded immediately. "The Varga remnants have been neutralized. Territory is secure, no loose ends." Loose ends. Chloe's hands tightened around Mia instinctively. People weren't supposed to talk like that. Not about life, not about death. But for them, it was routine. Gabriel nodded slightly, then turned his head toward Chloe again. For the first time since the door broke open, his expression softened slightly. Not enough for comfort, but enough for honesty. "This isn't what you think it is," he said. Chloe let out a short, bitter breath. "I don't think I understand what any of this is." A pause. Then Gabriel looked away as if admitting something he didn't like. "You saved someone you shouldn't have," he said quietly. That line hit harder than any threat, because it wasn't accusation. It was truth. One of the men finished dressing his wound. "We're ready to move, boss." Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Mia, then at Chloe. Something inside him shifted again, slower this time, more human. "I said I needed a night," he muttered, almost to himself. The lead man replied carefully, "And you got one." Silence followed. Chloe stood there, still holding Mia, realizing she had stepped into a world where even silence had meaning. Gabriel finally spoke again, his voice lower now. "She comes with us." The room went still again. Chloe blinked. "What?" Gabriel turned fully toward her, and for the first time the man who had looked like a storm now looked like something else entirely. A decision. Not a suggestion, a decision. "You're not safe here anymore," he said. Chloe's heart hammered. "I was safe before you came," she replied instantly. That landed. Even the men glanced briefly between them. Gabriel didn't argue, because she was right. He had brought everything to her door. For a moment, something like regret crossed his face. Then it hardened again. "Then I fix it," he said quietly. And outside, the storm began to rise again. The silence that followed Gabriel's words wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the cabin itself was waiting to see what kind of ending this night would choose. Chloe stood frozen near the kitchen counter, one arm still wrapped protectively around Mia. The little girl clung to her instinctively, as if Chloe had become the only stable thing left in a world that kept shifting without warning. Gabriel stood in the center of the room, freshly bandaged again, but nothing about him felt fixed. Even cleaned up, even controlled. He carried the weight of a world that didn't belong in places like this cabin. Outside, the storm had started to rise again, wind pressing against the walls like it wanted back in. Chloe finally spoke. Her voice quieter now, but steady. "You keep saying I'm not safe," she said, "but I was alone here. I was fine." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You weren't fine," he said simply. "You were just untouched." That distinction landed harder than anything else he had said so far, because it was true in a way Chloe didn't want to admit. A life lived alone wasn't the same as a life lived safely. It was just quieter. One of Gabriel's men shifted near the door, watching the exchange without interrupting. The cabin felt smaller now, not physically but emotionally, as if it had been filled with something too large to contain. Chloe looked down at Mia for a moment. The child's breathing had slowed, exhaustion finally catching up to fear. Whatever happened next, Chloe knew one thing clearly. This girl had already been through too much, and somehow, she still trusted her. That thought made something inside Chloe shift. She looked back at Gabriel. "You don't get to decide what happens to me," she said. Gabriel didn't react immediately. There was no anger in his expression, no pushback, just understanding. "I'm not deciding for you," he said. "I'm telling you what exists outside this door." Chloe let out a slow breath. "And inside this door?" she asked. A pause. Gabriel's eyes softened slightly. "Inside this door," he said, "you saved my life." That sentence changed the air again, because it was the first time he had said it without distance, without control. Just truth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside filled the silence instead. Then Mia shifted slightly in Chloe's arms, whispering something too soft to fully hear, but it broke the tension like glass. Gabriel immediately looked at his daughter. Something human returned to his face again. Not boss, not criminal, not weapon, just father. And Chloe saw it clearly now. Whatever he was, whatever he had done, whatever world he came from, that part was real. The room felt quieter after that realization. One of the men spoke gently, almost cautiously. "Boss, we should move before the storm gets worse." Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Chloe again, this time longer. Not evaluating, not commanding, just looking, and Chloe, for the first time, didn't look away. "You said I don't get to decide," Gabriel said finally. Chloe held his gaze. "Yes," a pause. Then he nodded once. "Then choose," he said, quietly. The room went still again, even. The men outside the door didn't move. Chloe felt her heartbeat in her throat. Every instinct she had built over years told her to refuse, to stay isolated, to keep the world at a distance where it couldn't hurt her. But the world had already come inside. It had come bleeding. It had come crying. It had come in the form of a child who now trusted her completely, and it had changed something she couldn't ignore anymore. She looked down at Mia again, then back at Gabriel. "You don't move her like an object," she said firmly. Gabriel nodded immediately. "She never is." That was enough. Not a promise of safety, not a guarantee of peace, but respect. Chloe exhaled. Slowly. "I'm not going to your estate as a prisoner," she said. A faint shift in Gabriel's expression. "Then, don't," he replied. That surprised her. He continued, voice steady. "Come as yourself, or don't come at all." Silence followed again, but this time it felt different. Not tense, just uncertain. Chloe looked around the cabin she had built her entire life inside. The isolation, the silence, the routine, a place where no one judged her. But no one truly saw her either. Then she looked at Mia, again, then at Gabriel, and something inside her settled into a decision she didn't fully understand yet. "I'll come," she said quietly. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time, she wasn't invisible anymore. Gabriel didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded once, like he had expected this answer all along. "Good," he said softly. One of the men stepped forward slightly. "We leave now." Outside, engines started again, cutting through the storm. The cabin door opened wider, cold air rushing in. Chloe adjusted Mia in her arms and took one last look at the place she had lived in solitude for so long. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't planned for. She stepped outside. The snow hit her face immediately, sharp and real. Lights from black vehicles cut through the storm, waiting. Gabriel walked beside her, slower than the others, still recovering but refusing to show weakness. For a moment, he glanced at her. "You could still go back," he said quietly. Chloe looked forward at the waiting vehicles. "No," she said. "I don't think I can. Not anymore, because once you see the world behind the curtain, you can't pretend it doesn't exist again." They reached the SUV. Gabriel opened the door for her himself, and as Chloe stepped inside with Mia, she realized something simple, something irreversible. Her life in silence had ended the moment she opened that door at 2 a.m. And now, something far more dangerous had begun, but this time, she wasn't invisible anymore, inside the vehicle. As the engines roared to life and the cabin faded into the storm behind them, Gabriel's voice came softly from the front. "Welcome to the real world, Chloe." And for the first time, she didn't feel like she didn't belong. She felt like she finally did. The end. If you enjoyed this cinematic story of survival, transformation, and unexpected connection, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more multi-part narratives, and comment below what you think Chloe should do next in her new world.